In version 2025.04 of WISH, we introduced a newer method of generating statistics. The method leverages the use of the SQL database engine, and therefore it is only available if you are running the SQL version of WISH. If you are not running the SQL version of WISH, this function and feature is not available to you. The method is designed to mimic the exact way that we do our statistics in the cloud-based version of WISH, which gives you a more powerful and faster way to generate statistical reports. In a nutshell, it looks like this. If you click on the Reports menu and go down to the Generate Statistics report, you'll notice that you have this new tab that didn't exist prior to this build. It's called the SQLStats tab. If you're running the SQL version of WISH, this tab will be available to you. Whereas if you're running the non-SQL version of WISH, that tab exists, but it's totally disabled, so you cannot get to that. Returning to the SQL version of WISH, this is the tab of the new feature. One of the first things to notice is if you have this yellow box at the top of your screen that says updated SQL procedures are available for download, and this button is available to you, you do need to click that, or at least you should click it so that it updates to the latest SQL procedures that we want embedded in your program. Okay, now that I've clicked that, it's updated the program and the procedures in the database that are required. This will stay on my screen until I close out of WISH and come back in. For the sake of this video, I'm not going to bother doing that. You'll notice that we still have the AutoStats tab, and we still have the longhand stats. Now, if you're running the SQL version of WISH, this tab is now totally disabled. There's no reason why you would ever need this tab if you're running SQL version of WISH, because it is fully replaced by all the functionality in the SQLStats tab. Switching back to the non-SQL version, where we disabled the SQLStats tab, you notice that the longhand stats tab is still available if you do not have SQL. Okay, so the choices in the SQLStats come down to these two tabs here, Fiscal Selection and Stat Choices. You would start on the Fiscal Selection tab, and you would drop down this box and pick the first month of the year that you're going to run. For most of you, that's April. But if you're also running calendar years, you can change that setting by going into Admin Settings, System Parameters, and under the Stats tab, you can select how many different fiscal years you want to run. For example, if you also want to track a January to December year, you would check that. You notice now that if we log out of the program and back in, when I go back to that screen now and want to choose my fiscal selection, you notice that I also have a January in addition to the April. The custom date range you would rarely use, but that will be used in the odd circumstances when you're asked for a very specific date range for statistics, such as the middle of October to the end of November or something like that. In that case, you'll notice you can just enter that here. But for reasons of proper statistical reporting, you would almost always be choosing that you want to report statistics based on fiscal year. And then after you choose the first field, you would enter the year that you want to report in. So for example, if I wanted to report a fiscal year that began in April 2025, I type that year in here. You'll notice if I change the year, my choices in the report columns down below change appropriately. So this is the way that you can choose different years. Now, over here on this right-hand side is the format. So the big news about the SQLStats is we added an Excel file format to this report. Previously, when using AutoStats, you had the PDF style only. And you'll notice if I revert from Excel file to a PDF file, my choice of report columns changes. And instead, just like we used to do under AutoStats, we pick the last month in the fiscal year that we want to report up to. For example, if we wanted to go to the end of the third quarter, we would pick December, because December would be the third quarter for a fiscal year that began in April. So those are the differences between Excel and PDF. When you're running the PDF, the report looks exactly like it always looked under Wish when you're running under AutoStats. If you use the Excel format, you can do something different. You can pick as many columns as you want. You're not limited, and you can decide how you want that report to look. So that's one of the benefits of the Excel sheet, is that you can get multiple columns, whereas you couldn't do that in the PDF. After you choose your format and the appropriate column choices here, you would move next and you would go to Stat Choices. And this is very similar to what you also used to choose under AutoStats. Your choices are Summary by Formula, or Detailed Statistics, or other stat choices. To revisit what that used to look like under AutoStats, and which is still available to you, by the way, this is exactly the same thing. You had Detailed Stats, Summary by Formula, and Other. So on the SQL Stats choices, the same choices exist, they just look slightly different. If you're choosing Summary by Formulas, which is most often the go-to and default choice, next you would choose if you're going to print from current formulas or archived formulas. Again, that's a decision that's exactly the same as it was under the AutoStats. If you were to print this now, if you were using the Excel format, it will pop up and ask you where you want the file to be saved. And after it's completed, it will offer to open the file for you. Of course, if you don't have Excel installed on your workstation, you will not be able to open it directly. However, in this case, I'm going to click the yes and open this directly. Now you'll notice here on my spreadsheet, and it's right off your screen here, but I have multiple columns. You'll also notice that down at the very bottom, you'll notice that we have these tabs down here. So this coincides to the pages that you would have seen under your PDF document. So for example, in this particular set of stats that I'm printing this from, we have two different funding sources that we're reporting to, and this is how they are populated here. If I were to take this same report, but go back to the fiscal selection and choose PDF, and remember I've just chosen the end of the month that I want to print to, now I want to print that by going back to Stat Choices, Current Formulas, and Print. You'll notice that this is the format that you're used to when you use AutoStats. And whereas the spreadsheet had two tabs, this has two sections. So there's the first section of the first two pages, and the second section is here. So the look for the PDF format is exactly the same as it was using AutoStats. Okay, in addition to Summary by Formulas, you can use Detailed Stats. And if you're using Detailed Stats, this is a little bit different than it was under AutoStats. So if we revisit the way you're used to under AutoStats, and if you selected this, you didn't get any further choices. The report that would be generated would actually contain every single detailed stat that exists, which is kind of cool, but it can be a very long report. In some cases, it can be a couple of thousand pages long or more. In the SQL version, for the sake of brevity and keeping the report more concise, we gave you the option to choose what you want to print in the detailed statistics report. And it starts by choosing a category. These are all the categories of the detailed stats that are tracked automatically. If you're familiar with the formula builder and generating formulas, these would be familiar to you. So for example, if I want to report all of the indigenous status codes in here, then I can pick a data element from the category. So each category has its own data element. We really recommend, if you're using this option, to get more familiar with the different data elements to refer to the manual for the formula builder here, which has an excellent section that details all of the data elements. And you will be able to learn more about these categories and then the sub-elements within each category. And you can pick one element at a time, for example, if you wanted to do that. Or you could pick all of the data elements in that single category. So it looks something like this. And then you can add other categories if you want to track, say, something about community, and maybe that particular one, you can add that to the list. So you can see here, this is a list of the data codes that I'm going to print. And again, if you have selected PDF or Excel, the report is going to look different. When it's on PDF and you print this, you will get a report that you're familiar with if you've ever printed the detailed stats. And this is a PDF that contains the pie charts for each one of those data elements that you requested. So this looks exactly the way that you're used to seeing them. Now this is different if you choose Excel. If I go back to my fiscal selection and change my format to Excel and go and print that same report again, I'm going to save the file to a folder and then I'm going to open it after. This is what it looks like here. In this case, it's giving me two tabs. It gives me a separate tab for each category I selected. You may recall I selected a category Indigenous status and community. So there's my two tabs at the bottom. And then at the top, and then on each workbook sheet, it's subdivided by the different data elements. So that's one data element, this yellow one's another data element, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, under each of the columns, I've received a report with multiple columns in it. And it's all in Excel format, so I can do anything that I want to here. Okay, last thing is if you go to other stat choices, for example, if you were a shelter in BC or Alberta, you would use one of these options to print the statistics for your shelter. Either if you're in Alberta, you're going to use this particular one. If you're in BC, you're probably going to use this one down here, one of these two. And they will, depending on which one you choose, may have some other choices that you need to put in here. If you are using these, of course, you can reach out to us if you have any questions or need further assistance. Okay, so now that the SQL stats are embedded into Wish, it means that at some point you can choose to no longer generate autostats. So you may recall in autostats, what happens is that it keeps a catalog of your fiscal years. Using SQL stats, we no longer need to keep a catalog of the different fiscal years, because up here when you're doing your fiscal selection, you can put any year that you want in there and print. So using SQL stats makes the cataloging of fiscal years redundant. What that means to you is that if you choose, you could at some point in the future choose to turn off autostats altogether. So under min functions and system parameters and the stats page, you can change this option. Instead of yes for autostats, you could in fact turn it to no. And if you do that, what that means is when the day end is complete, the server no longer has to run through its process of accumulating statistics. Furthermore, if on the screen you ever use this button to reset the day end to push it backwards, if you are using autostats, you may recall that it needs to retract the statistics from the catalog stats. When autostats are turned off, you no longer have to do that. So there's a huge time savings that comes about by no longer requiring autostats. What our suggestion is at this time is to maybe keep autostats in place till you are fully comfortable with the SQLStats function that we have embedded in Wish. Okay, that's an overview of the new feature. If you have any questions or need help with any of that, certainly reach out to us at support@grasp.ca and we'll be happy to assist.